At the start of the Cold War, each antagonist seeks to classify the other as the heir to the Third Reich that had just been toppled by both sides. No one, observes Lukács, would dare say today that Hitlerism, its ideology and its methods, belong completely to past history. 544 Indeed, on this the two sides appear to agree without much trouble. It's just that, while the communist philosopher makes use of the term imperialism to compare Truman and Hitler, 545 on the opposing side they resort to the term totalitarianism to unite Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union with one another. The two categories are wielded like weapons of war. The effort to associate the new enemy to the old one isn't limited to the denunciation of imperialism or totalitarianism. After having described the ideological course that leads to the triumph of the Third Reich as the process of reason's destruction, Lukács feels it necessary to also subsume in the category of irrationalism the ideology of the free world led by the United States. The task is not without its difficulties, and the Hungarian philosopher denounces the new form of irrationalism hidden away under an apparent rationality. Yes, in the new situation that's been created, it's completely natural that in philosophy it's not a German type of irrationalism that's dominant, but the Machian pragmatic type, whose representatives are, among others, Wittgenstein, Carnap, and Dewey. 546 The difficulty of comparing the new enemy to the old is also felt on the opposing side. In sketching out the origins of totalitarianism, after having for quite some time insisted on the fatal role of imperialism, and in that sense having denounced Lord Cromer, who, by as late as the second post-war period, is included by Churchill among the heroes of the British Empire, 547 Arendt completes the comparison between Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union by referring, aside from totalitarianism, to the pan-movements, in such a way that another analogy emerges: the pan-Germanism of the first corresponded to the pan-Slavism of the second. This conclusion is the finish line of a tour de force, yet more foolhardy than the one seen in Lukács. We will see Churchill compare the communist movement to a church characterized by an expansionist universalism and whose missionaries are in every country, in every people. In any case, Stalin's supposed pan-Slavism calls upon the peoples of the colonies to put an end to the rule of the master race, something considered natural and beneficial by the theorists of pan-Germanism. At that time, however, on both opposing sides, the principal concern is the construction of analogies and symmetries. We are forced to smile when we read in Arendt that what characterizes the pan-movements is the absolute pretension of having been chosen. The celebration of the United States as God's chosen people profoundly marks the American political tradition and continues to be heard today in the speeches by American presidents. The exigencies of the Cold War clearly take priority over any other consideration, as is confirmed by the argument made in 1950 by a prominent American historian. He would oppose Franklin D. Roosevelt and his policy of allying with the USSR. With the start of the Cold War, he felt encouraged to strengthen his thesis of the political and moral similarities between Hitler and Stalin, such that he intensely dedicates himself to the total comparison of the two dictators. The first insists on the racial destiny of the Teutonic people. The average reader could be reminded of the manifest destiny that, according to a long tradition, would oversee the unstoppable expansion of the United States. Yet arguing and omitting in a similar way to Arendt, the historian cited here makes the Nazi theme of the racial destiny of the Teutonic people correspond to the faith of Stalin and Lenin in the messianic role of the proletariat and the revolutionary international communist movement. Once again the celebration of the master race is central to Hitler's ideology. The search for analogies and precedents for this ought to go in the direction of the regime of white supremacy long enforced in the southern United States, to which Nazism made reference and that, in some form, continued to exist in 1950, the year of the cited book's publication. Yet nevertheless, The American historian discovers that similar to Hitler's theory of the master races, that which is in action in Stalin's Soviet Union, where nearly every important discovery is attributed to some unknown or poorly known Russian. 548 The reductio ad Hitlerum by the former Allies also includes the accusation of genocide. Possibly the first to move in this direction is the political front over which the communist movement and the Soviet Union have hegemony. In 1951, in New York, the black lawyer William Patterson, leader of the Civil Rights Congress, organizes the publication of a book that is also an appeal to the UN to make it aware of the tragedy affecting African Americans. In the United States, the regime of racial discrimination, humiliation, oppression and social marginalization remains in force. The rapes, lynchings, and legal and extrajudicial executions haven't ceased, and the police violence is getting worse. In making this long list of injustices and suffering, he makes reference to the convention approved by the UN in December of 1948 against the crime of genocide, and making use of the fact that this genocide convention doesn't necessarily mean the systematic annihilation of an entire ethnic group. The book carried the clearly provocative title, "We Charge Genocide." Possibly motivated by the strong opposition faced by this convention in American politics, the denunciation is translated into a number of languages. In the USSR it appears with an introduction by Ilya Ehrenburg, an intellectual of Jewish origin, who compares the Third Reich and the US to the degree that both are affected by a racist and genocidal frenzy, or at least potentially genocidal. The book obviously provokes outrage in the United States, and they respond by returning the accusation. A member of the committee that approved the UN Convention declares that, in the communist countries, it's official policy to deport entire populations on the basis of racial or national origin. 549 While the start of the Cold War sees both antagonists classify the other as the new version of Nazism and its genocidal madness, with the approaching triumph of the West, the game of analogies plays out exclusively to the favor of the victors. For the ruling ideology in particular, the absolutely identical comparison of Stalin and Hitler has become an obsession, reaching the point of presenting them as twin monsters.